This type of thinking is no different than stigmatizing people with AIDS. It's no different than stigmatizing trans people for assaults that you've been through. It is just a way to pivot and justify your bigotry. We can both condemn an action and not be a dickbag. You can condemn your abusive ex and not call BPD out, you stupid motherfucker. Hey folks, so we're going to cover something really quickly to kind of give a framework for something that happened. We're going to go over what's called the equality wheel, and we're going to go over the abuse, the power and control wheel to sort of differentiate what those things look like. I'm going to let Zena kind of handle that discussion. We're going to go over the power and control wheel very, very slightly because we just covered it in the Destiny segment. So if you want a more full version of that, using that as an example, please check out that video. So I am going to turn it over to Zena, and then I'm going to describe what happened on Twitter, which included someone posting something dumb, a really cool discussion with Sherry, who is, I think, the media manager for DM and Xander Hall. Love them. Love her. And something else tonight involving a content creator. So Zena, without further ado, take it away.
So what we've got here is the equality wheel, and this is the counterpart to the power and control wheel. These are things that I've both learned about as I've done training with in education with the domestic violence resource places. And they're really useful for giving examples and looking at ways in which different tactics are used in a relationship. All right, so this one is the equality wheel and is showing good tactics and positive behavior in a relationship. So we've got honesty and responsibility, open communication, intimacy, so things like respecting your partner's boundaries, physical affection, respecting each other's right to say no, asking before acting, right, good consent there, fairness and negotiation, so accepting changes, being willing to compromise, shared responsibilities, so making decisions together, splitting or alternating some, costs, doing things for each other, going places you both enjoy or taking turns. Respect, paying attention to your partner, even when your friends are around, valuing your partner's opinion, even if it differs from yours. And then you've got trust and support, being supportive, wanting the best for your partner, knowing your partner likes you, offering encouragement when necessary, and being okay with your partner having different friends, right? And so these are just a lot of really good things to keep in mind, right? You can look for these positive signs in a relationship, and you can also strive to work towards these things, right? If you're finding in a relationship that maybe not all of these areas are being met as well as they could have, as well as they could be, this is something that you and your partner can work towards. All right, so the counterpart to that, if you will show us real quick, Jess, is power and control. All right, and this is the wheel relating to abuse. Again, we went over this in the Destiny video. But this also goes into a bunch of tactics to watch out for, okay? And the important thing to recognize with abuse is that abuse isn't just a singular action, all right? It is a repeated pattern of behavior, right? And so, yeah, I think that's about what I've got for this part right now.
All right, so let's see what the happened.
How does this relate to what we had to deal with this week?
So back on, this is the 31st, a person who is known as Redacted for the purpose of this conversation said this: all of my friends have backstabbed me. Everyone inevitably abandons me. Red flag, red flag, red flag. I dislike the term red flag because I feel like it sometimes minimizes things and looks at behaviors without context. When this is done to people who are dealing with real context of say life is going poorly, they're financially unstable, any number of things, to say this is always a red flag, to me, ignores those possibilities. And as you'll note in a minute, when someone's dealing with mental illness that leads to these, such as an attachment disorder or borderline personality disorder, hint, hint, it's ableism.
Now, to be clear, remember I just said that abuse is a repeated pattern of behavior? There's 3 flags here, right? There's one statement. One. All right?
So I responded to this person in a quote tweet, and here's what I said. This is not a red flag, this is trauma, and if this person has borderline, this is ableist. Redacted said, if everyone you've ever befriended has abandoned you and it's time to look inward, this post is not people having a fear of abandonment. Jesus fucking Christ. You gave no context. None. None. This is cope. Online, I said it, and I still stand by this. I might have gone too hard. This mother pivoted. Look at that. And look at that. That's pivoting. Now you're like, Jess, why are you bringing this up? This seems like weird trauma. Well, I want you to see this real quick. Here's the original tweet, and here's the person beneath it. About 90% chance this person is saying that is BPD. Top response, besides mine, of course. Here's me down below saying, as someone as a clinician, this is absolutely bullshit, and also you're spreading stigma, yada yada. This isn't about abandonment issues. Your followers seem to think it is because you are being a vague douchebag. Weird how that works. Right? So, why am I bringing up random debates I've had? Following this, a content, I think they're a content, yeah, they're Cherry TV, content creator, decided to reach out over Twitter publicly and wanted to kind of say, hey, I feel like you were really hard and it seemed like you kind of went left field with some of your takes. And we ended up having a really good conversation about it. Granted, I had to use voice to text and write a giant screed, but it was worth it because the interaction actually ended really positively. The person in question mentioned that they had been through an abusive relationship and that they had felt that this was this was accurate. There are people who think this way, that it can be used as a way of manipulation. And I don't disagree with that. There are people who can use these kind of sentiments as a form of manipulation. You can see this with untreated narcissistic personality disorder, for example, or borderline. I'll own that. There's a way that this could be that. The problem I have with this tweet is that it's essentially arguing that it's always this. To call it a red flag is to say without context that it is always this. If you didn't mean that, you should have fucking clarified.
I gotta be clear about red flags. Calling something a red flag is not just, hey, I'm posting randomly. That is a statement that has a lot of power, because if you are familiar with that concept, all right, that is how people communicate to each other. Hey, you know what? This relationship might not be going great. Or, hey, I'm noticing things that are troubling to me about your relationship, right? Okay, so this is one of the ways that people can teach each other and help each other understand when, there might be toxic things in a relationship that they're in. All right? The other issue with this concept is that you need the other half of it. You can't just do it's a red flag here. One red flag is not a big deal, right? Everybody's got days, right? You lost your temper. You said something you really weren't happy with, and afterwards you got to clean it up, right? Okay. Or maybe you just don't realize something's going on yet. Who knows, right? You got to kind of get some clarity and get the people around you to kind of be like, hey, this thing might be happening. So, the issue isn't one red flag. If you're in a place where there are multiple things going on, remember that power and control wheel, you've got a bunch of different things off of that. Then that's probably time to look at this and go, okay, what's going on here, right? This should be a clue to check in with yourself about the situation you're in. And also, the big part of this is how the situations that are, red flags are being resolved. That's the biggest and most important part, right? Is your partner, willing to own it? Are they own what happened? Are you willing to own what happened, in whatever situation? is there some kind of resolution happening? Is there an agreement to work on something afterwards? Right? If the answer is no, that might be a problem. But if the answer is yes, well, is it really a red flag at that point? Because I'd argue that at that point, no, that's a green flag. That's a, hey, I've got a partner willing to work with me now, right? I've got a partner who is going to, do their personal work and really work on these issues and really work to improve themselves. Those are positive things, all right? And you learn about those things through conflict in relationships, all right? So you need the other half of the concept of red flags. You can't just willy-nilly throw it out there, because you will instead accept that there's abuse in a situation when there might not actually be abuse.
So with all of that said, and I think psychosocialism said it another way, but similarly important, it's essentializing negative or abusive behavior to BPD, which is bullshit, reductive, and actively harmful. I want to be clear that the people that responded to this, there was no challenge to that, except for me. At least last I checked. But let's move on. So I had this really great discussion with Cherry Bread TV. I think it's Cherry Bread TV. I think that's their @ And she was great. She heard me out. We actually came to a really nice place where, yeah, no, I fully bite the bullet on the fact this could be abusive behavior. And she was willing to hear me out about the fact that this has an underlying stigma attached to it for people that have abandonment issues. And by its nature, because criteria 1 of BPD, something I live with, is incredible fear, near existential fear, in my opinion, to real or imagined abandonment. All right?
Think about that. Real or imagined.
Yeah.
And existential, right? That's about how I experience it too when Jess is having a hard time. Yeah.
Admiral Paco, it's actually not Chariot. This is Cherry. Cherry Bread TV. This is a different person. Their symbol on Twitter is a bread with a cherry on it. And she's super cute and posts really good stuff. A lot of her stuff's about Xander Hall. Anyway. So, but yeah, Chariot's badass. Chariot follows our channel and also follow Chariot. So this happened like a motherfucking prophecy. People in Vosh's community are calling me ableist for suggesting that my ex having BPD is related to why I broke up with her. If you expand on the concept of ableism this much, then ableism is fine. This is the same person that thought that, and who basically sparked the EBT discussion.
Everybody deserves food. I'm just saying, like, full stop. Done. That's it.
We should definitely not treat poor people like they're incapable. And the poorest person here is more rich than any person in history. Do you understand the concept of relativity? Like, this person's talking, like this person in the EBT discussion that we were going to have tonight, but this took precedent. Like, no, you're right, psychosocialism. Doomer media is literally the Dunning-Kruger effect made flesh. Yeah, it literally just bent itself around that form. Right? And so here's where we need to talk about this, because almost like a magical prophecy, that conversation I had with some rando on Twitter and then got a really cool conversation with Cherry Bread ends up a couple days later having this. Now, I don't know why Vosh's community brought up BPD. There might be something I'm unaware of the context, but no, based Vosh's community, if this is the case. They go on. Does this create a stigma around BPD? Yes. But there should be a stigma around BPD. I want to reread that just so y'all hear this. There should be a stigma around BPD. It's not a death sentence, okay? But people who suffer from it desperately need help. It is very likely to cause massive suffering in persons and their partners and friends and associates. So the problem with this is that it is technically correct at one level. That is, BPD untreated can be really fucking rough for people and by extension to the people around you, which can then feed into as we've talked about, the self-fulfilling prophecy, thank you, of people leaving and then feeding into the abandonment thing, right? But this dumb motherfucker is essentially saying that they want to create stigma around a mental illness that already deals with dissociation, paranoia, and a tendency towards self-harm. So what I take from this is that Doomer Media wants people to kill themselves. I'm not adding that in there. This is what the text says. There should be a stigma around this disorder that compels people towards self-harm and mental and various other problems of like interpersonal issues. You want to stigmatize that group. Your brain is so smooth, it's chrome. So, well, yes, borderline can cause problems. I'm the first to admit that. The issue with this is that these sets of tweets already sort of prove my point I made to Cherry Bread and made on the Twitter discussion. BPD is stigmatized not just in the public, but also in mental health. We'll look at it in a minute. We'll just do a skim by, but I have a dissertation from somebody who looked at clinician bias of borderline and the negative effect it happens to people. How did that clinician bias happen? Doomer Media doesn't give a shit. Doomer Media doesn't fucking care. It happened because people continued their stigmatizing throughout the courses of training, through clinical training, and you had older clinicians transmitting to younger clinicians the understanding that these people are manipulative, harmful, and should be avoided, which then led to decreases in proper treatment and horror.
I've read some fucking wild stories too, and I'm, haven't even had that intensive job.
You want to know one of the most horrifying patterns I've seen with BPD people? Back in the 90s, and I've had this with about 5 different clients. Back in the 90s, do you know what they believed BPD was based on? Always based on. Not because the data showed this, but because this just is what was colloquially known. Molestation. So doctors and orderlies and nurses, when a person was having very real BPD symptoms, including self-harm, vague sense of self, anger, etc., essentially what happened is they would basically interrogate a kid or a person at that age and try to find out who hurt them. So spending hours gaslighting a kid, trying to tell them essentially, and again, colloquial gaslighting, but gaslighting a kid and basically trying to get them to tell you how their daddy hurt them when their daddy may not have. Now, can childhood sexual abuse lead to that outcome? Yes. That is one of the ways. But also, borderline has like a 40% heritability rate in twin studies. Like,
that's a decently big number there.
I mean, it's not ADHD 80s, but it's like, it's a lot. Do you guys see this so far? Do you see kind of like, this is the kind of stigma. So if somebody, for example, assaults a person with BPD in a hospital, the BPD person's more likely to be blamed because they're the angry, violent, harmful one. If they're someone who's traumatized and they have the comorbidity of, or they have the dual diagnosis of, say, CPTSD or some other type of trauma, along with BPD, suddenly their excessive behavior kicks in. I think that's number 5 on the list, but I'll double check in just a moment. And guess what? They go, oh, well, she's just slutty. Oh, by the way, you notice I'm using she a lot? Because this whole thing about exes, I don't know what Doomer Media's sexuality is. I'm going to guess het, because there's no way a gay person came up with these bad takes unless they're, whoa. So I'm guessing that his partner was feminine. And if that's the case, just goes along with the normal way in which we projected onto women that they had borderline. It's very similar to histrionic.
Yup.
Cluster B disorders, or at least half of them, have always been projected onto women. Histrionic personality disorder and borderline personality disorder, women. Antisocial personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder, guess what? Always men. We don't talk about narcissistic women. Not really, not often. There's a way that gender, the sexism we bring to these things, has caused in some issues. Yeah. Tiamat's like, what was the old methodology of histrionic? I diagnosed you with uterus. Take a crack about it. Yeah. Well, yeah. And then they would like give them big ass dildos that were like hooked up to what appeared to be steam engines. It was fucking like steampunk in this bitch. Anywho. Someone asked in chat, didn't Doomer Media and Heem's debate mention that? Okay, fair enough. That's where that came from. What about NPD? Can people defend themselves from narcissists, or is that immoral too? They absolutely should.
Also, NPD and BPD are not the same thing.
Well, maybe. Let me
go ahead.
Let me say this. So I went to a seminar about borderline, and I kind of tested some of my personal experiences with borderline. I know I'm supposed to stay out of YouTube chat. I just closed it. Shut up, T-Matt. Also, thank you. But it was a good question. So the thing here is that not only did this confirm like all of the beliefs I have about borderline, thank you, love. The issue was that they brought up the possibility that in the DSM-6, nothing's been decided, so this turns out to be false, nothing I can do. But there was someone who brought up the idea that you could create a trait model for cluster B disorders. That being, in the most severe cases of cluster B disorders, that being histrionic, borderline, narcissistic, antisocial, a trait-based model would be better. That is, they didn't find that everybody was cleanly antisocial or borderline or narcissistic. What you would have is overlap. So someone might be primarily borderline, but might have antisocial tendencies. Someone might have traits of narcissism, but also traits of antisocial, which, by the way, there's a term for that. Narcissism and antisocial together is known as a malignant narcissist. These are people that can, like, literally do horrific things and not feel anything from them. I'm not trying to stigmatize that either. There are legitimate people who are horrified by the fact they don't feel horrified by certain acts or certain things or seeing certain things. Again, these are all disorders. They are things that are inflicted on a person. Doesn't make their actions good if they do horrible actions, but they are still not people that asked for this. We can both condemn an action and not be a dickbag. You can condemn your abusive ex and not call BPD out, you stupid motherfucker. So, with all that said, I can say this, I like to think of myself as like maybe an expert of BPD. You know, I live with it. I've had to learn about it through my therapist. I have taken seminars on it. I've read a great deal about it. Again, I experience it. I work with clients who have it. Yeah, this is a thing. So,
and I would still argue that like our weird colloquial versions of various disorders are not the same thing. That's why I get so reactive when I see NPD and BPD clumped together as the same deal, because colloquially speaking, people just kind of go, no, all of this toxic stuff is all the same. It's all the same thing. It's fine. No, it's not fine. So,
all right,
that's kind of where I'm coming from on that one.
Yeah, onward to victory. Let's respond to all the brain dead takes from this thread and the quote tweets. 1, the idea that has nothing to do with BPD is absurd. A pervasive pattern of instability of personal relationships is the first thing in the DSM-5. Notice the pivot. The original argument was that BPD was abusive. They were abusive because they had BPD, not instability in relationships, which would be defined as, say, regularly ending of relationships, finding relationships where you end up being abused, which is very common for people with BPD. And again, borderline personality disorder. So notice the immediate pivot from the actual meaning of this. Instability. Now, could that mean that someone with BPD could be abusive? Sure, but that's not the only way. And notice the storyteller. Does anyone else remember when H. Bomber Guy watched The Room? Talked about it in his, I think it was like his Control-Alt-Delete video. And he talked about how The Room, from a certain perspective, was brilliant because it literally has within it the narrative of what a guy who doesn't understand why his partner left him and how he demonizes them would tell a movie or tell a story about that. And guess what? Just saying it. I'm not saying Doomer Media is Tommy Wiseau, but also... Oh, hi, Mock. So... Next, we have the rest of the criteria. Good. Love that for us. And by the way, I was right. Nope, excuse me. Excessive behavior is 4. My bad. Sorry, I remembered them out of order.
Oh, number 5 though too.
Recurrent, yeah, but that is not excessive behavior. That's actually
I'm sorry, not excessive. I thought you were referring to the other thing.
I'm sorry, I had them out of order. I just. So coming back to the red flags discussion, what Zena was alluding to previously is much like a diagnostic criteria, red flags are like criteria. Having one pop up could be a bad day. It could be an issue. But having a number of them come up and paying attention to them means that when you hit a certain threshold, that might be the time to get out. Someone having a bad time and thinking everyone's going to leave them could be paranoia. It could be issues. It could be any number of things. Now, if they do it and they're also being manipulative, they're also being all these, then that would come to that level of threshold to go, okay, you want to get the fuck out. We can't diagnose somebody as borderline with just having one of these. You have to have 5 or more. Points for anyone that can guess which ones I have. Moving on. All right, 2. I never specified this. Yes, I am an abuse survivor. This is why I left. It's amazing that several people have accused me of weaponizing this language when I never mentioned abuse. That means that you know BPD is associated with abuse, but you don't care about me being abused. No, actually, that's actually an incredibly bad argument. So, first off, I'm very sorry you were abused. The problem is people understand stigma and know that you're calling someone who was abusive with BPD. When someone says, oh, my ex my ex had BPD, and they bring it up in the context of the relationship going sour, the stigma is that that person was abusive. It's not that we don't care about your abuse. It's that this is exactly analogous to the language TERFs use when they talk about their sexual assault and try to use that as justification to their transphobia. Doomer media is pushing the narrative that people with BPD should be stigmatized because of his abuse, but these aren't connected in any way, shape, or form.
And specifically hey, a person with this particular thing or this thing did this, that means I'm going to make a large overarching statement about this group instead, right? There's a logical fallacy there.
3. I didn't want to bring this up, but as a response to him asking why I would break up with my rich ex-fiance, who for the record is also the most attractive woman I've ever met, I said BPD to avoid getting more personal details getting out there. So you used BPD as a shorthand. Then we have does this create stigma around BPD? Again, a huge part of getting over this event was understanding that no, my ex is not an evil person. She was sick. She probably couldn't help what she did. But that doesn't change the fact that she did some absurdly cruel things and she wouldn't have done without BPD. So can people with BPD be cruel? Yes. Yes. However, 1, who diagnosed her? I'd like to know. Like, they don't need to know for sure, but if, like, we really want to make this argument, can you prove to me she has this diagnosis? Or are you just pulling something randomly out of the DSM-5, you fucking idiot? And here's the problem. You're weaponizing the idea of using stigma because you see this as bad because of your anecdotal experience when people with BPD are far more likely to be abused themselves. Because guess what? If you're tremendously afraid of abandonment, you don't leave toxic relationships. Ask Hanging Wednesday sometime about my previous partners. Seriously. I stayed in some bad ones. You don't get to throw that shit at me or anyone else that has to deal with this crap. Also, the reduction that it's sick does take out the fact that this person made decisions. If this person doesn't have BPD, you're using the diagnosis to actually circumvent their choices. And if they do have BPD, guess what? They still made choices. People with BPD are not suddenly like exempt of their choices. This is incredibly infantilizing. And then let's see here. Last but not least, a bunch of people regarding this post are either lunatics or psychopaths. Imagine telling someone who suffered abuse you're a terrible person for identifying correctly the reason you were abused. So much for the tolerant left. So let me be really clear here. I'm tolerant of many things. I'm not tolerant of doomer media. And here's the problem. You didn't identify correctly. You are not a clinician. I don't know what your degree is in, if you even have one, but guess what? Mine is in this. Both my bachelor's and my master's. Guess what? there is no evidence presented in any of these tweets that I would even in any way say this has anything to do with BPD. You have not even demonstrated that. This is actually more faulty than the original red flag tweet we looked at earlier. This is insanity. This is a person who clearly wants to use whatever language possible to demonstrate why they're right. And guess what? This is what they did with the EBT conversation. This person does not think about the actual outcomes of their actions. This is child logic. Do you guys get that? This is literally child logic. Ada Stardust, if you don't tolerate mental health stigmatization and ableism, you're not actually tolerant. Yeah, we live in a society. So let's look at this. This is the work by Lindsay K. Heitman from 2014. This is talking about the origins of all this. And you can go through this. I'll share it around. It's free to give out, including the literature review, where it talks about the ways in which the diagnosis of BPD is not always consistent with the way we treat people with BPD. So again, I'm going to go through this very quickly because we have other things to get to. Estimated prevalence of BPD is 1.8% of the general population, roughly up there with trans people, and 8 to 15% of the clinical population seeking treatment for mental health services. One study, personnel in an integrated public mental health service found that almost all staff have regularly contact with people diagnosed with BPD. That's huge. So we're stigmatizing a massive number of people. I mean, hell, that's even a massive number. Even if we reduce that 1.8 down to like, what, 1%, 1.8% of like 330 million, you do the number. It's fucking huge. People with BPD frequently find themselves in hospital care and community settings because of the prevalence of self-harm. Again, the quality of relationship between therapist and client is one of the greatest correlates of therapeutic outcomes, in indicating the development of a therapeutic alliance is central to treatment. This study suggests that clients who most invoke difficult feelings in therapists are depressed borderline clients. Another study posits therapists may experience these negative emotions in their work with clients with BPD because the client's poor interactional skills and threats of suicide. Within the therapeutic relationship, negative countertransference reactions can easily enforce the client's self-critical feelings and foster hopelessness and shame. So again, countertransferences, if I remember correctly, Hanging Wednesday can correct me on this, transference is when the client projects onto you, and sometimes that can be useful, and countertransference is when you put it onto them. That's not great. Studies on service delivery illustrate how often service devoid of care deprives clinicians and clients of the perspective that only genuine concern evokes. That is, people will interact with more people with borderline and have no care for them actually. Psychosocialism said BPD is one of the big groups of people you contact inside hospital wards, which is a shame because those environments are terrible for them and not designed for primary optimal care. Yes, and if there's bias there, you're less likely to give them care at all. Yeah, you can be caring to a person and say, like, I don't know if I can deal with this right now where you're at, and not be stigmatizing towards BPD. There's a huge difference between that and just being a douche. Anyway, like hysteria and other diagnoses, there tends to stigmatize the emotional thought typically feminine. Diagnoses of borderline disorder are disproportionately assigned to women. Additionally, given the preponderance of social workers or women, the conceptualization and stigma of borderline personality disorder in a female-dominated profession could be indicative of an internalized sexism that plays out in the therapeutic relation through countertransference. So if you have issues with women and you're also a woman, guess what you're gonna do? Project on your client. Colloquially, the term of borderline is often used pejoratively as a label. Officially, borderline is a diagnostic label. Unofficially, its clinical parlance is synonymous with anathema. Kind of like how Doomer Media used it. Weird. I'm going to stop with this now, but I want you to know, this thing is 52 pages. I've read it once. I might read it again. But you can go through here. You can see, oh, here's one. Dean and Mayosevitz found a large proportion, 65 registered nurses, psychiatric nurses reported negative attitudes and emotional reactions towards people with BPD. The majority of nurses saw people with BPD as manipulative. 1/3 reported the patients with BPD made them angry, and more than 1/3 disagreed or strongly agreed that they know how to adequately provide care for people diagnosed with BPD. This study also looked at clinicians' knowledge about appropriate symptoms and treatment of BPD and found some significant deficits. Another study showed that mental health professionals in Australia are generally amenable to further training aimed at changing attitudes about working with patients with BPD, and that such training is effective in producing attitudinal changes as measured by optimism, enthusiasm, confidence, and willing to work with people with BPD. Given the proposed correlation of provider feelings of incompetency and lack of empathy, the shift in attitude following training outline is promising. So you throw people out there to be clinicians, and guess what? They don't know what the fuck to do because they don't know how to deal with this. Guys, like, I need you to understand this. Doomer Media, I don't know what the rest of their content looks like. I literally just started listening to the Vosh debate earlier today, the one that he was watching between Doomer Media and Heem. I need you to understand this. Yes, BBT people can have issues. Yes, they can have difficulties in interpersonal relationships. God knows I've had them with Zena. This type of thinking is no different than stigmatizing people with AIDS. It's no different than stigmatizing trans people for assaults that you've been through. It is just a way to pivot and justify your bigotry. People with BPD deserve compassion, support, and if need be, you may have to make boundaries with them because they're not great at them. But we don't deserve to be hated. So with that said, Zena, do you have any final thoughts?
I mean, I don't have final thoughts. I got fucking stories and shit.
Go.
Yeah. You guys get to listen to like Jess rant here.
Sorry about that.
No, ranting's good. Good rant.
I mean, I am the one with BPD, so go.
Yeah, but I also have an axe to grind because goddamn. So I get really angry when I see tweets like this and shit like this. The beginning of my relationship with Jess was really rough. There was a lot of stuff going on in my personal life and a lot of stuff going on with Jess too. And there was Jess was definitely having panic attacks. It was a thing. Existential dread, right? New partner, all of that. But the problem is that there was this assumption on the part of my friends that I was somehow being harmed. I'm going to be real here. Jess's panic attacks never hurt me. This was generally just, kind of sitting somewhere, kind of having a really rough time. But that wasn't causing harm to me, okay? Right? Like, somebody can be having a panic attack, but that doesn't mean that panic attack's about me. It's not. All right? And so it really sucked, because they would do all sorts of things to try and separate us out, to try and separate me from Jess, and try and get me on my own. Or not, have Jess around. So it would be like blowing up conflicts to be much, much bigger than they were. Okay? Oh, God. No, I mean, some of those situations were just fucking rough.
Well, and it does bring up something I want to add one point to those stories. I'm not going to go into details. Some of those people were predatory. Some of those people turned out to be incredibly dangerous to be around. And one of the things I have to be really clear about is there are times that people will use the claim of toxicity or abuse as a way to isolate people.
Yep.
There were people that were trying to frame me as this awful fucking monster because they wanted Zena. I'm not saying that as like a what if. They literally tried. Like, come on now.
No, that super fucking happened. Yeah. There was a few times where I'm like, I really hope I'm not getting assaulted tonight. That was a thing. Because again, there was a lot of ploys to get me separated from my partner, right? All right, and so it was this whole basis, this whole like assumption that my partner dealing with mental illness, right, was bad. All right, and these are people that claim to be on the left, claim to be, you know, tolerant to mental illness and knowledgeable about this stuff. No, that's not what happened. You know, and the worst, not the worst, but like, I don't know, I got the worst shit from them, frankly. And luckily, as they were trying to prove all of this shit, just, you know, was basically like respecting every goddamn boundary I made. So it really just ended up proving them fucking wrong. Right? That like, no, really, like this one over here next to me is actually the person respecting my boundaries and wishes here. So yeah, that really sucked. And I really hate this whole like thing with red flags and accepting abuse when that's not actually the case. All right. I have been through that. My childhood family was like that, and it sucks. It sucks a lot. But framing the mental health stuff that people deal with as abuse is really dumb and hurts everybody. All right. Somebody's panic attack, somebody's flashbacks. Yeah, there might be some messy stuff to clean up at the end of the day, but like a panic attack in and of itself isn't, you know, like the worst thing in the world. It's not. All right. They come and they go. You know, and they're definitely things that like people can work on, people can work through, right? And framing them as this massively toxic things means that you cut off from this person, from people as they are working through this stuff, right? You cut off from it as, you know, people are working through this stuff too. So, yeah, I think that's my big thing. Is just there are better ways to frame abuse and mental health issues, and you can absolutely talk about those things in separate, you know, sentences, right? You can say, hey, you know, this thing I'm experiencing, you know what, there might be some other stuff going on. Cool. All right. And there might be times where like, no, this situation might not be good. You might not be, you know, getting all your needs met in a relationship. That's a thing. All right. Or you might not be able to really handle what's going on with the other person. It's okay to say that and, you know, break up if you really need to. It's okay. But you can still break up and not be a big shit about it. Mm-hmm. All right. And like, I'm over here with PMDD. Trust me, there's a lot of shit around PMDD too. All right. I'm lucky I'm in a really stable relationship. But no, Jess goes through a lot with me every month when like, no, my hormones are crashing around and I can't control it. Right. None of the medication options are great. So, you know, this stuff goes both ways.
Summary. So the initial person who posted the red flag tweet, still kind of an idiot and still not. Again, clarity sucks, and unfortunately, you're signaling to people with BPD. We just showed that in the dissertation, that people hear that, and it does have that effect. Even if they're not clinicians, this is true within society. As BPD got known, it became this way to sort of demonize women. It's just not that. It's not this thing that they've made it out to be. And so the problem is, if you want to learn more about it, go to our video from a long time ago. I'm sorry about the audio. That I cover this. It's fine. But here's the thing. That person couldn't actually deal with the arguments. So what they did is they pivoted to, that person doesn't have abandonment issues, despite the fact that someone responded and said they had, 90% of the people have BPD. Still signaling to people, sorry. So with that said, Doomer Media is playing off the tropes that previous tweet did. The same tweets, rather than actually explain what abusive behavior his partner actually did. This is no different than The Room, where we're just getting this person framed as being this mentally ill person who did something, and that's how justifies the stigmatizing of 1.8% of the population. These are conservative arguments. I'm sorry, they just are. They're conservative arguments. And if you like Doomer Media, okay, I guess. But for someone to come out and say that, like, someone's evil, or that people shouldn't have food stamps, which as a kid that grew up on food stamps, you can go fuck yourself. Or that, rather than actually hold your partner accountable and just decide to, randomly diagnose her when you don't have that ability. Yeah, that's the act of kind of abusive people, right? Like the whole notion of like framing someone as this evil thing, or framing your partner as being mentally ill. Man, didn't we just talk about this? I feel like we're on the same segment.
Yeah, no, it kind of is. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll see you next time. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, consider donating to us. You can support us on our website, transgirltherapist.org. You can also help us on our Patreon, link below, or you can become a member here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching.